right now.
Well, good morning. Thanks for showing up today, and I want to iterate my thanks to the sponsors and Goldie for hosting forums like this where we get to hear from a wide variety of speakers and people who have interests in making our federal government and the capabilities the federal government has better through information systems. So we're on a journey. I have to say I'm fairly pleased about where we are, and I wanted to talk this morning about where we're at on the IT modernization journey. The signature proposal that we put forth last year as part of our Cyber National Action Plan was, at the time, something we called the IT Modernization Fund. And as many things are in Washington, it's gone through some transformation itself over the past few months. And I think it's actually gotten better as a result of that process in a number of respects. So what passed the House, and I want to thank all of the Congress, or all of our House of Representative people who voted for it, for passing what's now known as the MGT Act, Modernizing Government Technology. It has a couple of core principles that are carried on from our original proposal, that being a centralized fund that we can use to fund modernization efforts. But it also creates working capital funds in the agencies as well, or working capital accounts. In both cases right now, we don't have actual money in the accounts. That comes a little bit later. But the construct and the framework of it is something that I think is quite workable and in some ways a nice improvement on our original proposals. So it's passed the House. Now it goes to the Senate. If any of you have influence in the Senate, we'd love your help making sure they understand the importance of it. We're certainly doing all that we can. And then it has to go through the sort of appropriations process. And again, I'm quite optimistic. The thing that I think everyone understands is that doing what we've been doing hasn't worked so well, and that we need a new model or a new paradigm for this. And it's that paradigm that I want to talk about today a little bit. I've been through the digitization journey in a number of different places. While I was at Microsoft, certainly the Walt Disney Company, and even General Motors a decade or so ago, was going through the first phases of digitization. And there's a couple of principles that I think ring true in terms of how we should look at the digitization journey differently than we've looked at past investments in information technology. And I've talked about this a little bit before, but I want to cement in your minds today a new mental model for thinking about IT governance, IT architecture, funding for investments in IT. And here's the simple test. I want you to, if you have the opportunity, to look at the information systems architecture of your organization, what its boundaries are, the scope of the infrastructure and the applications. And if it exactly matches the org chart of your agency, you know you're in trouble. If there's a one-to-one match between the information systems capability you have and the way your org chart is organized, you're in deep doo-doo. Because inherently what it means is you've not taken a customer-centric approach. You've not taken a customer-centric approach to the customers that you serve, and you haven't organized either your infrastructure or your applications to serve the customer. Inherently, when you have that structure where you have an information systems architecture that's bound, tightly coupled to the org chart paradigm, inherently what you have is a business process that's taking whatever it does and shoving it out to the customer through the lens of your org chart. And there's nobody who's a customer of anything that wants to have to decode that institution's org chart to do what it is they want to do. You shouldn't have to know how an enterprise is organized in order to find information or to get served or to do whatever it is you're trying to do in terms of your interaction with that organization. But in so many ways, what we have today in our legacy is that we've automated what were manual processes and created information systems architectures around that organizational paradigm. And it wasn't wrong to do that at the time. It's just that we need to move on from that. Somebody I once worked for said, you know, if you're riding a dead horse, best dismount. This is a paradigm for IT that's dead. Let's dismount. Let's move on to a different model. Let's move on to a customer-centric model that leverages, you know, broad cloud infrastructure, broad cloud shared services, and then let's focus the precious resources that we have in individual agencies on doing the mission-specific, mission-critical things that only those agencies can do. But they should be able to ride on a broad set of common capabilities. When I first joined GM, I was told about the evolution of factories. And one of the interesting things I heard was that in the early days of the automobile industry, power was not a reliable utility. It's in the early days of, you know, mass power generation and so on. So in the early days of manufacturing, every large manufacturing plant had its own power generation capability because it was the only way that you could guarantee steady, reliable power at the local plant, and it was under the control of that plant. And it was only when, you know, broad public utilities became available that General Motors and other large manufacturers abandoned that I have to have my own power plant as a paradigm. And I think it's time we think that same way about how we architect our information systems in our federal government. Let's take advantage of the broad utility capability that exists and also the economics. But to do that, we're going to have to move away from this organizational paradigm for architecture, this organizational paradigm for funding and governance and decision making, and move to one that supports this capability to take advantage of these broader structures. Does that make sense? So that's why we think that this IT Modernization Fund, or now MGT, is a better way of doing things. What it allows is for agencies to come together and say, here's some common things that we can do or we'd like to do or we should do together, and build common infrastructure and shared services upon which applications and citizen-serving capabilities can be built. And if we do that, it's going to take a lot of cost out. But I'm also excited about one more thing, which is it will give us speed. And I think in the years going forward, speed is actually our most precious commodity. 5 years from now, we're probably not going to be talking about what the cost of things are. I think we're going to be talking about how fast we are, how flexible we are, how adaptable we are to meet the needs of our country and our citizens and other organizations that our government serves. And I also know, since we're talking about cybersecurity today, that if we adopt this new paradigm, we've got a much better shot at tackling some of the serious cybersecurity issues we have. Today, in that organizational paradigm model that we have, we're expecting the smallest of federal agencies to do as good a job on cybersecurity as the DoD. And you know that the chances of that happening are slim and none. Small agency or groups of small agencies just don't have the resources, can't get the kind of talent, can't put together the critical mass of capability that you need to do an adequate job. And yet some of those small agencies have some of the most important information and represent some of the most important assets that our country has. So we have to just figure out a different model for that than what we have. So that's my pitch. Let's get rid of the org chart paradigm for doing IT. Doesn't make sense, at least for a lot of things. Now, the second thing I wanted to talk about today is more about a national conversation that I think we should have. Those that know me know I'm old enough to, and so are many of you, to remember the quality crisis that we had in the 80s and 90s in terms of American manufacturing. And it was a time when everyone was running to Japan and elsewhere around the world because American quality was terrible compared to what you could get if you bought say, a Japanese car or an appliance that was manufactured somewhere other than in the United States. It was a national crisis. There's no question about it. And it reminds me somewhat of the situation we have in cybersecurity today. Everybody loved running around pointing out how terrible everybody else was in their space. It was you're bad, you're even worse, this sucks, it's a circle the drain sort of approach. There was no hope. Anybody who gave, General Motors or Ford or any of the other automotive companies any credit for doing anything, you looked like you were a lunatic compared to Toyota, Honda, and what have you. Anybody remember those days? Yeah, it was terrible. You couldn't buy an American appliance with any confidence that it was as good as something that was coming out of somewhere else in the world. And then an amazing thing happened. This country got galvanized around a massive quality movement. Remember all the Six Sigma stuff and GE and Jack Welch and all that sort of stuff? Yeah, TQM, right. And it spread like wildfire in the U.S. I got to GM and I was shocked to discover all the grassroots stuff that was going on in GM in every department to try to dramatically improve our quality. And it had a wonderful effect. Suddenly there were, black belts and brown belts everywhere in the organization, and you had a whole community of people galvanized towards doing something different than what we've been doing, measuring results, figuring out where the defects were in our processes and so on. It was an amazing thing. That's now continued on and is making progress in other areas other than manufacturing. Right now, one of the biggest areas for quality is in the whole healthcare sector. And, you could say the same thing about where healthcare is at. There's huge opportunity for improvement. Well, guess where else I think there's room for this? it's in the cybersecurity space. If you think about what we do, every time there's a breach or a hack, you could think of this as a defect. It's a design defect, an operation defect, what have you. And we ought to be able to measure these things, and we ought to be able to apply some of the same processes and methods that we use to solve some of our manufacturing quality issues. So you may have seen recently that we announced with the Department of Commerce a Baldrige cyber program. It's not going to be a quality award like we did for manufacturing, but what it is going to do is try to help change the conversation from you suck, you're bad, these guys are worse, to hopefully inspiring a set of conversations around what can we do by taking good methodology and good practice, things that have worked in other areas, and applying it to this critical issue. The framework that NIST put out is one key piece of one of the tools that will be used in that Baldrige cyber effort. So you're going to see this ramp up over the next couple of months, and I think what we need is a broad national conversation, creating awareness, sharing information, but most importantly, deeply embedding good practices in all of our institutions across all aspects of our government and all aspects of our economy. And I think it's only by having this broader conversation and making a commitment as a country, as a government, and as a part of our private sector that we're going to do something meaningful about this, that we're going to make progress. So I'm really excited about the opportunity and the conversation that I think we're going to have over the next several months. And if you're involved in the private sector, I'd like you to get on board and talk to people about quality, about the things that we can do in cybersecurity to improve our lot. And let's move away from this, you suck, you're bad, they're worse, so-and-so had a problem and so on. We need to look at it through a different lens. We need to elevate the conversation and make a commitment to making progress. So I'm super excited about it, and I think it's going to be part and parcel of how we actually make progress and create a different path. And I expect to be a part of it for a really long time. So I'm out of time. I want to thank all of you for your support, our suppliers, our dedicated federal employees, and everybody who's been working hard on both modernization and information security. God knows we've got a lot of work to do, but I think the alignment and the time and the opportunity are massive, and we just need to work together in a collaborative way to go address these critical issues. Thanks so much.